Okay, good morning, everyone. We are learning Lila Nishmas, Mindel, Mariam, Bas Kalman, Ruvain. The entire Masechta is being learned in her memory, and Aliyah. We are on the bottom of Vav Amud Beis, and our hope is to get to the top of Zayin Amud Beis. Some more slightly difficult Gemaras, or Gemara. The main focus of the Gemaras over here is going to be explaining to us different parameters, new parameters of what it means to be a Carmelist, and some discussions about what is included in Rishus Harabim. So we're still focused primarily on this question of Rishuyos, and as I said a moment ago, that's going to go till around Daf Yud. Okay, so Amar Mar. So we are quoting from an earlier brisa that we saw a few lines earlier. Aval yam ubika vaistevanis vakarmelis Einan lo kirshus yachid v'lo kirshus rabim. So the Gemara actually is on Vav Amud Aleph, told us that these places, the sea, the bika is like open fields. The bench area in front of stores. If you recall, in front of stores, they would have these like benches which were kind of built in. People would put their wares over there. Vakarmelis. And we're going to come back to the term Carmelist because it's kind of funny to place. We're saying, what is a Carmelist? One of the things, what is a Carmelist, is a Carmelist. That's kind of odd. So we'll come back to that. All those things, Einon lo kirshus yachid lo kirshus rabim, they are not like Rishus Yachid or Rishus Rabim. Rather, they are called a Carmelist. Ask the Gemara, Bika Einon lo kirshus yachid lo kirshus rabim. How could you say a Bika, open fields, is not like the private or public domain? But not. We have a Mishnah that says as follows. The Mishnah is in Bava Basra and Taros, and the Mishnah says as follows. It's in Taros. It's quoted in Bava Basra. Habika bimosachama, a bika in the summer. Okay, so open fields in the summer. What's the difference? So let's pause here for a second. There's a difference in fields between the summer and the winter. Of course, in the summer, they harvest in the beginning of the summer, so in the summer your fields are empty, and therefore there's no issue of walking through fields because there's nothing there. You're not going to ruin anything. During the winter, as they start to grow, right? Once you get to the fall, I should say, once they start to grow, then people don't walk through the fields, because if you walk through the fields, you're going to ruin the crops that are growing there. So that's one point you have to keep in mind. The other point you have to keep in mind is when it comes to Tuma and Tara, we have a principle based on the halachos of Sota that Safek Bershus Hayachid is, when it comes to Tuma, is Tameh. Okay, so if you have a doubt of Tuma in a private domain, we treat it as Tameh. What's the source for that? The source for that is the Sota. The Sota herself is you have a Safek. We don't know what happened behind closed doors, okay? And it happens dafka, specifically in a private domain, and we treat it as Tameh. She is forbidden to her husband. So Chazal learned from there as a general principle, whenever you have a doubt of Tuma in a private domain, in someone which is really, truly not traversed by people, it's something which people don't really have access to. A suffix in such an area is tameh. If it's a suffix in suffix tuma versus a rabim is tahar, right? Okay, that's a general principle when it comes to tuma. So over here, this Gemara, what it does, this Mishnah, what it does is going to contrast, is going to point out that we have a notion of Rishus Yachid and Rishus Rabim, both by Shabbos and by Tuma, and it's going to contrast, pointing out that based on the season, there's going to be a slight change. Again, because in the seasons, keep in mind, there is more or less traffic based on the season, okay? So now let's go back to that Mishnah. Habika, the open fields, Bimosachama in the summer. Rishus Yachid Shabbos, it's a private domain for Shabbos, okay? Private domain, meaning it is practically speaking a private domain, although we'll come back to that. That's where the part of the question is going to come from, because we just said open fields are a Carmelist, and now we're saying Rishus Yachid. Okay, we'll come back to that. Rishus Rabim LaTuma, and it is a public domain for Tuma. Why is it a public domain for Tuma? Because during the summer, everyone's walking through, and therefore, the whole source for what is private, what is public, is it's a place where people are not really walking there. In the summer, people do walk there because there are no crops on the field. Therefore, it is a Rishus Rabim for Tuma. B'mosei Geshamim in the winter, meaning once the rain season starts, Rishus Yachid lekan ulekan. It's Rishus Yachid for both. Okay, why is Rishus Yachid for both? Because people are not walking through the fields, and therefore it's more akin to a full-fledged private domain when it comes to Tuma, in the sense that people are not there, it's private, and therefore a suffix Rishus Yachid will treat as Tameh. Bottom line, though, for our purposes, the Gemara is the Mishnah, is telling us that a field, a bika, is a Rishus Yachid, both in the summer and the winter, and our brisa above said it's a Carmelist. So Amr Ula, we're going to see two answers. Ula says L'olam Carmelisi. Havya, really it is a Carmelist. So my Karila Rishus Yachid. Why is it called a Rishus Yachid in this context? Lefisha ain't a Rishus Rabim, since it's not a Rishus Rabim. Now that doesn't seem like such a great answer. What do you mean? If it's not, it's a Carmelist. Why are you calling it a Rishus Yachid? So the way some of the Mefarshim understand this is that since in this context we're contrasting. We're trying to put Tuma and Shabbos side by side. With Tuma, there's only two domains, private or public. And therefore, to try to in this context, it would make sense to call it a Rishus Yachid, even though if you were just to be talking about Shabbos halachos, it would be called a Carmelis. But in this context, where you're trying to equate and distinguish between Shabbos and Tuma, it would make sense to use the terminology of Rishus Yachid and Rishus Rabim. Obviously, it's a bit of a stretch, and we'll come back to the fact that it's a bit of a stretch, but that's how Ula is answering it. Rav Ashi has a more straightforward answer. Rav Ashi Amar, Kigon de Islam mechitzos. Rav Ashi says, I have a much simpler answer. In the Rishus, the bika that is being discussed in that Mishnah and Taros, we're talking about a case where it has fences, and therefore it is a full-fledged or almost full-fledged Rishus Yachid, whereas the open field in the Brisa that we called a Carmelis, there it is not fenced in, and therefore it is a full-fledged Carmelis. So he's answering by saying that in one place it's called Rishus Yachid, open field, because it has fences. Okay, and we're going to support this now. Had Amar Ula Amar Rav Yochanan. We have a memra from ultimately from Rav Yochanan who says karpif. Karpif is the Aramaic term for open fields, Yosmi Beis Asayim, which is larger than a Beis Asayim. Okay, so what that means is essentially is about 8,000 square feet. Okay, so a very large area. Shelo Hukaf Ladira, which was not enclosed for living space. Okay, what that means is as follows. Basically, you could have fields which are fenced in, which are just meant for fields, and you have fields which are fenced in, but there's also a house on the property. And therefore, when you fence it in, the fencing in is called lidira. It's being done, the fencing in is being most specifically being done for the people living there. It's to enclose the house. And as we'll see, that makes a difference how it's fenced in. Is it fenced in for a house, in which case it's a full-fledged Rishus Yachid, or not? Let's see. So again, Karpef Yosem Beis Asayim Shelo Hukaf Lidira. You have this large area which was fenced in, but it wasn't fenced in around a house. Vafilu kar, vafilu karayim. Even if it's even larger, kar and karayim, a kar is 30 sa. So do the math. Basically, we're talking about like now 30 times 120,000 square feet. Basically, very large areas. Hazorik l'socho chayav. If you throw into that space, you throw from a public domain into this karpef, this huge karpef, which is fenced in, but it's not fenced in for a house. Okay, still you're going to be chayav. Why are you chayav? What it's telling you is that midoraisa, this is a full-fledged Rishus Yachid. It's just that Chazal came along and said that when it's fenced in, but not fenced in for living space, then we'll treat it as a Carmelis. But the Chazal could only add a layer to what's already midoraisa. Again, let's pause. I'm getting blank stares again. Sorry. So let's say it again. We have a fenced-in area, okay? A huge fenced-in area, okay? Chazal come along and say, so a huge fenced-in area, what we're learning over here is, it's a private domain, it's a huge fenced-in area, but there's no house in that area, or at least let's say when the fences were built, there was no home there, okay? So it was not mukaf ladir, it was not set up around living space. So it's private in the sense that it's walled in, but it's not Rishus HaYachid in the sense that it's a place where a person is living. So midoraisa, that is a full-fledged Rishus HaYachid though. Okay, so imagine you walk by a farm and the farm is fully fenced in. That is a full-fledged Rishus HaYachid. Why? Because it has fences. There's no home there. Okay, so midrabanan, Chazal came along and said, don't carry there because we're going to treat it like a Carmelis. Right? We're going to treat it like a Carmelis because of the fact that there's no home there. But if you were to throw something from the public domain into that fenced-in area, that would be you would be chayav. Why? Because it's a full-fledged Rishus Yachid midoraisa. Right? The Chazal can't negate that chiyuv, and therefore comes along Rav Ashi and says as follows: when the Mishnah said that it is when let's just plug it all in. So when we said it's Rishus Yachid, we're talking about a case where it is fenced in, where it's fenced in. So midoraisa, it's a full-fledged Rishus Yachid. Okay, our brisa, which called it a full-fledged Carmelis above, there it wasn't fenced in, and therefore we've answered the stira. Okay, makes sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, says the Gemara. Why are you chayiv? Why is it called Rishus Yachid? Because there are walls here. Okay, people are not living there, and therefore we don't call it a Rishus Yachid. But at the end of the day, it is a midoraisa, it's a full-fledged Rishus Yachid again, and that's what the Mishnah and Taros was referring to. So Bishlam Rav Ashi lo Amar Kedu Ula. We understand Rav Ashi doesn't say like Ula. Okay, we'll come back to saying why exactly in a moment. Why doesn't Ula say like the simple, straightforward? Again, Ula was the first answer. Ula was the one who said, really it's a Carmelis, but we're just saying we're calling it a Carmelis because it's not a Rishus Rabim, which is a bit of a stretch, right? So why doesn't Ula say it more straightforward? Bika karela karpefi. He says that if it has mechitzos, if it has walls, then the term bika is inappropriate. Okay, so you and I maybe don't know the etymology so well, but he's telling us that the Mishnah, which Rav Ashi is trying to say, is a fenced-in area. That is, to call a bika fenced in is inappropriate. It's wrong. It's incorrect. So when it says bika, by definition, he's saying, by definition, it doesn't have walls. And therefore, he's not comfortable using Rav Ashi's answer, who wants to say that the bika in that Mishnah Taros was a walled-in place. He says, no, it can't be because the fact that he used the term bika. Okay? And Rav Ashi, Rishus Yachid Katani. Rav Ashi rejects Ula's approach for the more what we'll call the more straightforward reason, because at the end of the day, it didn't say Carmelis, it said Rishus Yachid, and Ula's saying, yeah, even though it said Rishus Yachid, it really means Carmelis. Rav Ashi is not willing to entertain that the halacha would be so vague. If it's calling it Rishus Yachid, it must mean it's Rishus Yachid. Fine. And that is the end of the Gemara. We do paskin like this memra of Ula Rav Yochanan. There is no debate between Ula and Rav Ashi about this point, and that is that a fenced-in, let's say a farm that doesn't have a house on the farm, it's just a fenced-in area. So on the one hand, you can't carry there because there's no house there. So we treat it like a karmelis. At the same time, biblically, midoraisa to Rishus Yachid. Therefore, you throw something from the streets into that fenced-in area, you're going to be chayiv chatos, because technically, once it has walls, it's called a Rishus Yachid, even no matter how large of a space it is. Okay? Good. Next Gemara. Vakarmelis. Now we're going back to the question that we've asked already twice, and that is that in the list of karmelises, it also lists Carmelis. Very strange. Atu, Kulu, Nami, Lav, Carmelis, Ninu. Are not the rest of them all Carmelises? Why are we're saying, here's a list of Carmelises, X, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and Carmelis. What's going on over here? So, Kiyas, Rav Dimi, Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan comes along and says, "L'nitzricha el keren zavis hasmuch l'rishus harabim." Keren zavis oftentimes means a corner, but in this context, it means a place which is set back. So imagine you have a street, and you have houses, and you have one house that's set back. Okay, so meaning right. So you have houses. So imagine like a city where not Baltimore, where everyone has nice big yards in front of their houses. But you have like a street where there's the houses, right? Like, think of downtown Baltimore, right? Basically, you have houses, and then you have one house which is set back, right? So there's like space in front of that house that's set back. That space is called Carmelis. Okay, and the Gemara is going to explain a little bit more. My time. 1 second. Dezimnim because even though sometimes the masses who are walking through the public domain will go there, since it's not so easy to go there, right? It's kind of like out of there. If you're walking in a strum, you want to walk in a straight line. Sometimes there's a lot of people in the public domain, so you kind of walk into that indented or setback place. Ki karmelis dami, therefore it's like a karmelis. Now, the Gemara doesn't explain why is it still called a karmelis. It's kind of funny that, why don't we call it something else? And so the Baal Ma'or explains that the reason this example is called a karmelis because this is the prototype of a karmelis. Let's take a step back. Why did Chazal aser walking into a karmelis, taking from private domain to a karmelis? Why do they treat a karmelis like a quasi Rishus Harabim? The reason for that is because there are cases where you have something which looks like a Rishus Harabim, right? And yet it's not a Rishus Harabim, and we're going to allow you to carry there. You're going to now go ahead and carry in Rishus Harabim. So really, technically, Midoraisa, the place that's not Rishus Harabim, right? Rishus Harabim is a public thoroughfare. The place that's set back, and therefore you have some space in front of the house, that biblically, Midoraisa is not going to be a Rishus Harabim. But it looks like Rishus Harabim, because the public, you have thousands of people walking there, and sometimes they're going to walk there and say, oh, I'm allowed to carry here, therefore I can carry on the streets. So Chazal came along and said, no, you can't carry there either, because it could be confused with Rishus Harabim. So the reason the Gemara, the Brisa, calls this place a Carmelis is due to the fact that it is the prototype of why did Chazal come along and Aser Carmelises? Because of cases like this, which are similar, and therefore all cases which are somewhat similar to Rishus Harabim, they're going to treat as a quasi Rishus Harabim, i.e. a Carmelis. Okay, and that's why it's called a Carmelis. Okay. Kios Rav Dimi, Rav Yochanan, a few more cases of Carmelis. So Rav Yochanan says, Bein Hamudim Nidon Ki Carmelis. Okay, so you have these huge plazas, and in the middle of the plazas, you had, again, what was taking place there? A lot of times sales were taking place there. So you have two things that are found in the plaza. One is benches in front of the stores, okay, and on the benches they have placed their wares. You also have poles. I think on the bottom articles, they have the pictures of the poles? Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. You have these like pillars. Imagine like these Roman columns, and basically on the Roman columns, people would hang their wares. People have these pop-up stores, right? People were just setting things up everywhere. So you imagine a big plaza. It's easy to walk through, but then you have a couple of these pillars in the middle of the plaza. It's not so easy to walk through that area. Granted, it's part of the public domain. It's part of this huge plaza, but it's kind of hard to walk through there. So Kiyasar Avdim Yamar Bein Amudim Nidon Ki Carmelis, and therefore between the pillars that area is only a Rishus Rabim Midrabanan, right? It's a Carmelis. Because my time, why is that? Afagav Darsi Barabim, even though it's in the middle of the plaza. And therefore, many people are walking there, Kivan Lo Mistigi Lu Behedya, since you can't go like easily or straightforward, get Carmelis Damya, therefore it's like a Carmelis. So again, you have that same principle, and here you have something which is in Rishus Rabim, but once travel is obstructed in some minor way, it now loses the status of Rishus Rabim. Is like, this is a full-fledged public thoroughfare. Any time you obstruct walking, its status now is lowered to a Carmelis. Okay? Rav Zera, Rav Yehuda, we have a dissenting view, as we'll see. It's Tabash Lefnei Hamudin, a bench, the bench in front of the stores, Nidon ke Carmelis, that is a Carmelis. Okay, and we'll see that there's actually a debate taking place over here. Again, a bench is something you can't walk through. A bench is something you'd have to walk over, which is obviously, it's much more difficult to walk over a bench than it is to walk through the pillars. Okay, so therefore the Gemara says, Lamada Amar Ben Hamudim, the one who says that a Carmelis is the area between the pillars, Kol Shekain Itztaba, would certainly hold that the bench area is certainly a Carmelis, because it's actually much harder to walk over a bench, right? Lamanda Amar Itztaba, according to the second opinion. Rav Zera Amar Yehuda, who said that it's the bench that is a Carmelis, Itztaba hu delo nicha tashmishte, the bench where it's really difficult to use this area, that's a Carmelis. Aval bein hamudim denicha tashmishte lo, but to walk through the pillars, which is okay, it's not as difficult, therefore he would not say it's a Carmelis. Okay, so you have it would be a full-fledged Rishus Rabim. Correct, exactly. Lishna Achrina, a different way of framing this. Aval bein hamudim, where it's a little more explicit, between the pillars, dezimnim de darsi le rabim, where sometimes people walk through there, Rishus Rabim damya, that is like Rishus Rabim. Okay, so you have different, basically you have machlokes, everyone agrees, it's the bench in the plaza is a Carmelis, that area is a Carmelis. The question is, bein hamudim, you have a machlokes, walking between the pillars, is that, at what point do we draw the line, like it's too difficult to walk here, that it loses its status of Rishus Rabim, okay? Okay. Similarly, we're going to now talk about other things which may, because of other things which may lose the status of things in the Rishus Rabim which may override the status of Rishus Rabim. Okay. So Amar Rabba Bar Shila Amar Rav Chisda Levena Zekufa Rishus Rabim. Let's say you have a brick that is upright. A brick. Imagine this thing is a brick. Okay, and it's upright in Rishus Rabim. Okay. Vizarak, and a person throws something from 4 amos away. So again, if someone were to throw something in Rishus Rabim from point A to point B, and the item traverses 4 amos, right? Then you'd be chayav. So v'tach bifaneha chayav. Let's say I throw it and it hits the wall of the brick, right? So it's there. Then I'm going to be chayav. It just traveled 4 amos. So you have to obviously a sticky item. I don't know, whatever. The Gemara's example is like a fig cake or something. You're throwing it and it lands on the wall. It lands on the wall of the brick, right? So basically, this is the brick. It lands over here. Okay. So chayav agava, if it lands on top of it, Pater, you're going to be pater. Why? It's 3 tzvachim high. When it's 3 tzvachim high and it lands on top of it, then you are going to be pater. Why? Because people don't walk there. If people don't walk on top of a 3 tefach brick, it's too high. Therefore, it loses its status of Rishus Rabim, and it's no longer part of the Rishus Rabim. It's a mini Carmelis, exactly. Aval hizmi vehigi, but when it comes to thorns and brambles, whatever, basically bushes, afagav delo gvi shlosha. There they say, even though it's not 3 tvachim high, there you are going to be pater. Why? Because people don't walk on thorns. Right? So a chiddush over here, even though it's within 3 tvachim, and normally we say things within 3 tvachim are just kekarka damyar, like the ground, but since it's something which is thorny, right? It's a thorn. So basically it's going to hurt you, therefore people don't walk there, and therefore it loses its status of Rishus Rabim, and therefore if you throw onto bushes, onto these thorns, even though it's less than 3 tvachim, that's not part of Rishus Rabim since people don't walk there. V'chir barav amar afilu hizmi v'higi, says no, even those thorns, because ultimately people do walk there. About tzoa, when it comes to excrement, low, people don't walk on excrement. Rav Ashi Amar afilu tzoa. Rav Ashi says no. Maybe it's true. People don't walk on excrement, but since it's within 3 tvachim, Rav Ashi comes along, and this is how we paskin. Anything within 3 tvachim, whether people walk on it or not, is by definition part of the ground. We saw this. We talked about this earlier with earlier halachos about, and we spoke about the chair for avelim. Anything within 3 tvachim is like the ground, and that is the ruling of Rav Ashi, and that's how we paskin. Okay, one last set of halachos. Amar Rabba Devei Rav Shila Ki Asr Dimi Amar Rav Yochanan. We have many members from Rav Yochanan over here today. Ein Carmelis Pchusa Me'arba. A Carmelis If it's less than 4 tefachim wide, it is not called a karmelis. Rather, it would be called a makom petur. A makom petur is a place where, again, as we saw a few days ago, you could travel from Rosh Hashanah into makom petur, from a makom petur into Rosh Yachid. A makom petur is it's you can't be chayv in that case. Rav Sheshes v'tosefes adasar. Rav Sheshes then adds, and it goes up to 10. What does it mean? Mai v'tosefes adasar. What does he mean when he says it goes up to 10? Ilei madika mechitza sara hu dahavi karmelis v'lo lo. If he means lo havi karmelis, if he means to say that in order to be the status of a karmelis, it needs to be 10 tvachim high. Okay, the Gemara is going to reject this. Again, the Gemara is now trying to understand what does he mean when he says you need 10. It goes up to 10. Does it mean that you need to have a wall of 10 to be a karmelis? That can't be. Let's say a house, a very small house, like a kid's house almost. Okay, it doesn't have 10 tvachim. It's very short. With the roof, it goes up to 10. But the roof, by definition, that means that inside the house, is there 10 tvachim? No. If the roof, which is its own measurements, is what brings it to 10, that means outside it's going to be 10, but inside it's going to be less than 10. Al gago mutu l'taltal b'kulo. On the roof, you're allowed to carry. B'socha mitalpan bo. Within it, you don't carry. Right? So why can't you carry? Because it's not a Rosh Hashanah, because it's not 10 tvachim high, it's a karmelis. So you see a karmelis that has, right, so it's clearly a karmelis does not need those walls of 10 tvachim to be called a karmelis. So we're rejecting the possibility that what he meant was that...
It is a karmelis.
It is a karmelis, even though it doesn't have a 10 tefach wall.
So we don't say that it's connected to the...
We don't say it's connected to outside. Yeah, we're going to analyze it. Good. Yeah, we don't say that, right? Ella, right? You could only, fine, bottom line is you can't carry in there. Ella, what does it mean it goes up to 10? Dadasara, hu dahavi karmelis, lemal me'asar tvachim, lo havi karmelis. To tell you that a karmelis goes only up to 10 tvachim, it does not go above 10 tvachim. A karmelis is only up to the size of 10 tvachim, above that it doesn't. And now we support that. Amar Shmuel, Rav Yehuda, Shinana. Shmuel tells Rav Yehuda, sharp one, lo tehavi b'mili d'shabsa lemal me'asara. Don't say, when it comes to the matters of Shabbos, doesn't go above 10. Lamai Hilchasa. What was Shmuel talking about regarding what halacha? If he was coming to tell you that Rosh Yachid doesn't go above 10, we saw this earlier. A person has, again, like the street performer. The guy has a pole, he has a basket, and let's say it's a 100 amma tall pole, and a person throws from Rosh Hashanah into that basket, you're going to be chayav because Rosh Hashanah goes ad l'rakia. So when Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, sharp one, but with the laws of Shabbos only goes up 10 tvachim, he wasn't talking about Rosh Yachid because we just saw clearly Rosh Yachid goes up to the heavens. Eladin Rosh Rabim, next page, Zayin Mabez, Lemala Me'asara, to say that Rosh Rabim does not go above 10, Masnisani, it's a Mefurish Mishnah, it's explicit. That can't be what he was coming to teach us because we have a Mishnah that says explicitly, it's not a Zork Dal Damas Bekos Lemala Me'asara Tvachim, Zork Ba'avir. If you throw on a wall above 10 tvachim, it's like you throw it in the air. You're patur, Lemata Me'asara, Kizork Ba'aretz. If you throw less than 10 tvachim, it's like you throw on the ground. So don't tell me he was coming to teach us about Rosh Hashanah because that is explicit Mishnah. Ella Karmelis, rather he's coming to teach us a Karmelis, in Karmelis Lemala Me'asara, that a Karmelis is not above 10. Okay, so basically I'm going to teach us a new principle, a new parameter, a new guideline of Karmelis, that Karmelis is like Rosh Hashanah, don't go above 10 tefachim. If you're in a Karmelis-esque area and you throw something above 10 tefachim, that is a Makom Petur, it is not a Karmelis, okay? And now the Gemara concludes, Vakilu Baraban, Miklu Rosh Yachid, Miklu Rosh Hashanah, and Chazal were lenient with the Karmelis, both with the leniencies of the private domain and the leniencies of the public domain. Miklu Rosh Yachid, regarding the leniencies of Rosh Yachid, Makam Arba, Hu, Dahavi Karmelis, below Makam Petur, Ba'almahu, when it comes to, just like in Rosh Yachid, you need to be 4 tefachim wide, and if it's not, then you are going to be pater. Okay, then it's Makom Betur. Miklu Rosh Rabim, regarding the leniencies of Rosh Hashanah, Asar Tefachim, Hu Dahavi Karmelis, up to 10 Tefachim, it's a Karmelis, L'mal Me'asar Tefachim, Lo Havi Karmelis, but above 10 Tefachim, it is not a Karmelis. So you see, it has the leniencies of both Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah. Have a wonderful day.